Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Wisdom channel. Tonight, we'll be entering the world of Norse mythology, where every god carries a secret, every promise has a price, and even the future can cast a shadow over the present. These stories were shaped in a world that believed fate could be known, but not escaped. The gods could cross realms, speak with the dead, and wield impossible weapons. Yet none of them stood beyond consequence. That is what gives these myths their power. They are not stories about perfection. They are stories about courage in the face of adversity. As we journey deeper, we will encounter ancient beings whose choices shaped the world. We will follow the paths that lead toward Ragnarok. And we will discover why these old stories still feel strangely alive. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, all you need to do is relax. Let your body soften and allow your eyes to grow heavy. And let your mind begin to gently unwind as we step into the world of Norse mythology together. Let's begin. Norse mythology begins with a vast emptiness before every living thing. Before the gods had names, before humans had breath, the Old Norse imagination began with Ginnungagap. It was not a kingdom or a place people could visit. It was a yawning gap between extremes. On one side was cold. On the other side was fire. The world began when those opposite forces touched. That idea is simple, but it feels strangely modern. Life appears at the meeting point between tension and balance. Some people hear this and wonder whether the myth is only a story, or whether ancient minds were describing a deeper pattern in nature. The first movement of existence is not a command from a distant throne. It is a collision. It is pressure. It is transformation. This gives Norse mythology a serious tone from the start. Creation is not comfortable. It is unstable, dangerous, and alive with consequence. The whole universe begins as a threshold. Odin gave up an eye because wisdom demanded a real price. The king of the gods was not satisfied with ordinary knowledge. He wanted the kind of understanding that reaches beneath appearances. To gain it, he came to Mimir's well. This was not a fountain of easy answers. It was a place where memory and hidden truth gathered at the root of existence. The price was one of his eyes. That detail matters because the myth refuses to treat wisdom as decoration. Odin becomes wiser by accepting a permanent loss. He sees more because he agrees to see less in the usual way. For anyone drawn to forbidden knowledge or hidden history, this is one of the great mythic images. The seeker must pay. The veil does not lift for free. In a softer lesson for daily life, the story says that understanding changes us. We cannot truly know something and remain untouched by it. Thor was not merely strong because he protected a fragile world. Modern culture often remembers Thor as a warrior with a hammer, but the older figure is more interesting than raw muscle. He stands between ordinary life and forces that would overwhelm it. Farmers, families, travelers, and working people looked to him because his strength had a purpose. He did not simply dominate. He guarded the boundary where chaos pressed against the human world. That makes him less like a show of power and more like a sacred protector. His hammer was connected not only to battle, but also to blessing and protection. This is why Thor remains so easy to understand. Strength becomes meaningful when it serves something vulnerable. Some people look at his role and see a memory of thunder as divine defense. Others see a psychological teaching. The strong part of the self must protect the peaceful part. Power without service becomes noise. Power with service becomes trust. Loki shows how cleverness can save the gods and endanger them. Few figures in world mythology are as slippery as Loki. He solves problems that nobody else can solve, then creates disasters that nobody else can ignore. He is not simply evil. That would make him too easy. He is the restless intelligence that sees loopholes, breaks rules, and exposes weakness. Many of the gods benefit from his schemes before they suffer from them. That is what makes him fascinating. Cleverness can be a gift when it rescues a failing plan. It can become poison when it loses any sense of responsibility. In a late-night conversation, Loki feels almost like the mythic version of disruptive genius. He hacks the system, then forgets that people live inside the system he is hacking. The deeper lesson is sharp. Intelligence does not automatically become wisdom. A mind can be brilliant and still become dangerous when it treats consequences as someone else's burden. Yggdrasil holds existence together while quietly suffering beneath every realm. The world tree is one of the most powerful ideas in Norse mythology because it turns existence into a living structure. Realms do not flip separately in empty space. They are connected through roots, trunk, and branches. Gods, humans, giants, and the dead all belong to the same greater pattern. Yet the tree is not untouched by pain. Creatures gnaw at it. Its roots are strained. Its life continues under pressure. This is not a perfect cosmic machine. It is a living order that must endure damage. Some people hear this and sense an ancient way of thinking about ecology, long before modern language gave it a name. Nothing exists alone. Harm in one region can matter elsewhere. The image also works inwardly. A human life has visible branches and hidden roots. What supports us is often under stress. The myth asks us to honor connection, not as a theory, but as survival. Ragnarok is not only destruction because renewal waits beyond it. Many traditions imagine an ending, but the Norse version is unusually honest. The gods know catastrophe is coming. They do not receive a simple rescue from fate. The wolf breaks loose. Old bonds fail. Great powers fall. Yet the story does not stop with ruin. After the final conflict, a renewed world appears. Some gods return. Human life continues. The earth rises again with a kind of solemn promise. This is not cheerful optimism. It is a harder teaching. Endings may be real, but they may not be absolute. For people who enjoy alternative ways of reading myth, Ragnarok can feel like an ancient memory of cycles. Civilizations collapse. Climates shift. Old orders burn out. Something still remains, and something new begins. The wisdom here is not that everything will be fine. It is that meaning does not depend on permanent safety. Renewal can begin after the proudest structures have fallen. The gods of the North were powerful, but never fully safe. What makes Norse mythology so gripping is that divine power does not remove danger. The gods can build halls, make weapons, bind enemies, and bargain with hidden forces. Still, they remain exposed to loss. They can be tricked. They can be wounded. They can make choices that return later with terrible weight. This gives the myths a different feeling from stories where heaven is perfectly secure. In the northern imagination, even sacred beings live inside risk. That makes them strangely close to us. They do not teach by being flawless. They teach by facing a world that cannot be fully controlled. Some people find this more believable than a universe ruled by easy perfection. It feels like a sacred drama built around uncertainty. The lesson is practical and unsentimental. Rank does not save anyone from consequence. Power may delay trouble, but it cannot erase the conditions of existence. Fate mattered deeply because even Odin could not escape his ending. Odin searches for knowledge with a hunger that defines him. He speaks with the dead. He studies signs. He sacrifices comfort for insight. Yet the future he discovers does not grant him escape. It tells him what must come. That is the strange power of fate in Norse myth. Knowing the pattern does not place someone outside it. This idea can unsettle modern minds because we often treat information as control. Odin proves that information can also become burden. He sees the road ahead, but he must still walk it. In a speculative mood, some people compare this to ancient ideas about destiny as a kind of code written into reality. The myth does not ask us to prove that. It asks something more personal. What do we do when we cannot control the ending? The Norse answer is severe and dignified. We choose how to meet it. Valhalla was not paradise because courage still required daily struggle. Many people picture Valhalla as a reward hall for brave warriors. But the old stories make it stranger than simple comfort. Those chosen there do not spend eternity relaxing. They fight each day and feast each night. Their wounds are restored, and the cycle continues. This afterlife reflects a culture that respected preparation, endurance, and reputation. It is not a soft escape from conflict. It is training for the final crisis. That detail changes everything. Valhalla is not merely about reward. It is about readiness. Some people hear this and wonder whether the myth preserves a harsh spiritual technology. The soul is shaped through repetition. Courage is practiced until fear loses command. For ordinary life, the lesson is clear. We do not become brave because struggle disappears. We become brave because we meet difficulty again and again until our character learns how to stand. Norse myths teach that honor survives when certainty disappears. The northern stories rarely offer perfect reassurance. Prophecies are dark. Friendships can break. Oaths can twist into disaster. The future often looks fixed, yet choices still matter intensely. That is where honor enters. In these myths, a person is not measured only by victory. A person is measured by conduct when victory is no longer guaranteed. This is one reason the stories speak so strongly to people interested in philosophy and self-mastery. They do not promise that good behavior controls fate. They suggest that integrity has value even when outcomes remain uncertain. Some people might call this grim. Others see it as strangely freeing. If the world cannot be forced to obey us, then the deeper task is to govern ourselves. The Old Norse mind seems to understand that reputation, courage, and loyalty are ways of leaving a mark inside a passing world. Creation began when fire and ice met in the ancient void. The birth of the Norse cosmos begins with a striking idea. Life emerges where opposites collide. Muspelheim brings heat. Niflheim brings freezing mist. Between them, melting and movement begin. From that contact comes the first living being. This is not a peaceful beginning shaped by calm order. It is a dramatic process of extremes becoming fertile. That is why the story still feels powerful. It turns creation into a mystery of tension. Some people who enjoy fringe theories love this part because it sounds almost like a coded memory of natural forces. Heat, cold, vapor, and transformation appear before gods and humans. Of course, myth is not a laboratory report. Yet ancient stories often preserve observations in symbolic form. The wisdom is easy to carry into life. Growth often begins where opposing pressures meet. Too much comfort can leave things unchanged. Friction can become the birthplace of form. The first being was nourished by a cow older than mankind. One of the strangest early figures in Norse mythology is Odin. She appears before humans, before cities, and before the familiar order of the gods. This great cow nourishes the first giant with her milk, while she herself licks salty ice. From that ice, another being slowly emerges. It is an unforgettable scene because it makes life dependent on a creature many cultures would associate with food, patience, and survival. There is nothing glamorous about it, yet it is profound. Before kings and weapons, there is nourishment. Before divine politics, there is feeding. Some people hear this and wonder whether the myth contains an old memory of cattle as sacred wealth in northern life. That possibility makes the story feel grounded, as well as mysterious. The lesson is humble. Existence does not begin with conquest. It begins with dependence. Even the oldest powers require care before they can act. Odin and his brothers shaped the world from a giant's body. The killing of Ymir is one of the boldest creation scenes in mythology. Odin, Vili, and Thee do not make the world from nothing. They reshape a primal being into land, sea, sky, and other parts of reality. To modern ears, this can sound shocking. Yet the idea is not meaningless violence. It suggests that order is built from older chaos. The world we know may be arranged from something vast, raw, and difficult to comprehend. For people who like hidden meanings, this myth almost feels like a cosmic anatomy. The body becomes geography. Life becomes architecture. The story also carries a serious warning. Creation can involve loss. A new order may rise from the remains of what came before. In human terms, we often build our lives from past pain. The old material is not erased. It is transformed into a place where others can stand. Human life began when gods found driftwood on the shore. The Norse origin of humanity is quiet compared with the violence of cosmic creation. The gods discover two pieces of wood by the water. From them, they form the first man and woman. They give breath, awareness, and the qualities needed for human life. This detail is fascinating because it makes humanity both humble and sacred. We begin as found material. We are not carved from gold or dropped from the stars. We are shaped from something ordinary that had been carried by the sea. Some people find this image deeply strange. It hints that human beings are part of nature before they become anything else. We are animated matter, lifted into consciousness by gifts we did not earn. The wisdom is simple and powerful. Nobody begins as self-made. Every life starts as something received. Our task is not to pretend otherwise. Our task is to honor the breath placed within us. Midgard means middle enclosure, because humanity lived between greater powers. The human world was not imagined as the center of everything. It was a protected middle place. Around it were forces older, larger, and more dangerous than everyday life. This gives Norse mythology a gripping sense of scale. Humans are important, but they are not in control of the whole design. The very name suggests shelter. It also suggests limitation. We live inside a boundary. Beyond that boundary, other powers move according to their own nature. This can feel surprisingly relevant today. People still live between forces they cannot master. Weather, mortality, instinct, memory, and social pressure all shape the field of life. Some people with a taste for hidden history see Midgard as a clue that ancient cultures imagined reality in layers. Whether literal or symbolic, the teaching is strong. Human life is precious because it is exposed. The middle place must be protected because it can be lost. Asgard was the home of gods, but not a perfect heaven. Asgard is often imagined as glorious, but the stories make it more complicated. It has halls, rulers, treasures, and councils. It also has fear, conflict, bargains, and mistakes. The gods live there, but they do not live without tension. That is what makes the place believable as mythic drama. A perfect heaven would leave little room for wisdom. Asgard matters because power still has problems. Its inhabitants must negotiate with giants, manage threats, and deal with the consequences of their own choices. Some people find this far more interesting than a flawless divine realm. It suggests that higher beings still participate in struggle. They are not outside the pattern. They are deeper inside it. In personal terms, this warns us against fantasy. Reaching a higher station does not end in a work. A great hall can still contain anxiety. A throne can still face uncertainty. The Rainbow Bridge connected worlds while guarding sacred boundaries. Bifrost is one of the most memorable structures in Norse mythology. It links the realm of the gods with the human world, but it is not simply a path. It is guarded. It can be crossed by divine beings. It is also destined to break during the final upheaval. That makes it a symbol of access with limits. Worlds may touch, but they do not merge casually. This idea has obvious appeal for people who enjoy strange possibilities. Ancient stories often speak of thresholds between levels of reality. The bridge suggests movement between them, yet it also insists on protection. Not every crossing is safe. Not every visitor belongs. The myth invites a careful kind of wonder. What if reality is not flat? What if boundaries are part of wisdom rather than restriction? Even in daily life, access requires readiness. Doors matter because what lies beyond them matters. Heimdall could hear grass growing and wool forming on sheep. Heimdall is the watchman of the gods, and his senses are almost impossible to imagine. The old descriptions make him a being of extreme awareness. He needs less sleep than a bird. He watches the bridge that connects worlds. He can detect signs far beyond ordinary perception. This is not just a colorful detail. It tells us what guardianship requires. Protection begins with attention. Before danger becomes obvious, someone must notice the small change. Some people read Heimdall as a figure of heightened consciousness. In that view, he represents the part of us that senses trouble before the rational mind has named it. The myth makes vigilance sacred. It also makes it costly. To stand guard is to live awake while others rest. That can feel lonely, but it is necessary. Every community depends on someone who can hear what others miss and respond before the gate is broken. Bifrost burned with color because divine paths were never ordinary roads. The bridge between realms was not described as a dull structure. It had brightness, danger, and holiness built into it. In some accounts, its fiery quality helps keep certain beings away. This detail turns the path itself into a test. To move between worlds is not like walking down a village road. It involves exposure to forces that can harm the unready. That idea appears in many wisdom traditions, but Norse mythology gives it a vivid northern form. Some people see Bifrost as a mythic memory of the aurora, a sky phenomenon that can look like a gate opening above the world. Others treat it as a symbol of spiritual passage. Either way, the point is clear. Higher access is not casual access. The route to sacred power may be beautiful, but beauty does not mean safety. Some roads demand strength before they allow arrival. Giants were not monsters alone because they carried ancient wisdom. The giants of Norse mythology are often treated as enemies of the gods, but that is only part of the picture. Many of them are dangerous. Some are also knowledgeable, ancestral, and deeply connected to primal forces. Odin seeks wisdom from giant figures. Gods marry into giant families. Important beings come from both sides of the divide. This makes the whole mythology richer than a simple battle between good and evil. The giants represent powers that civilization needs, fears, and cannot fully absorb. Some people see them as memories of older sacred forces that were never completely replaced. That interpretation gives the stories a hidden historical flavor. The new order stands on ground that belonged to something older. The lesson is mature. What we call monstrous may sometimes hold knowledge we have not learned to approach. Wisdom does not always come dressed in comfort. Sometimes it waits beyond the border of approval. Jotunheim represented wild forces that even the gods had to respect. This was not just a foreign country on a mythic map. It was the realm beyond the settled boundary. It held beings who were ancient, dangerous, and sometimes wiser than the gods themselves. The remarkable thing is that the gods did not simply defeat Jotunheim and move on. They kept returning there. They negotiated with its inhabitants. They married into its families. They sought knowledge from figures who lived outside divine society. That makes the whole mythology feel less like a clean battle between good and evil. It feels more like a warning about the powers civilization cannot erase. Some people read Jotunheim as the symbolic home of the unknown world beyond the village fire. Others see it as the part of the mind that refuses to be controlled. Either way, the message is strong. You do not become wise by denying the wild. You become wise by knowing how close it stands. The Aesir and Vanir once fought before learning uneasy peace. The gods of Norse mythology were not always one united order. There was once a war between two divine groups. The Aesir are usually connected with rule, battle, and command. The Vanir are often linked with fertility, wealth, and the living power of nature. The conflict ended in a way that feels strangely political. There was no simple wiping out of one side. Instead, hostages were exchanged, divine households were joined, and the sacred order became more mixed than before. This is one of those moments where myth feels like it may be preserving an old memory. Some people wonder whether it echoes different peoples, cults, or spiritual systems meeting in the distant north. Whatever its origin, the teaching is mature. Peace does not always mean everyone agrees. Sometimes peace means rival powers accept that the world needs more than one kind of strength. A living order must learn to include what it once resisted. Njord brought wealth from the sea, but remained divided by longing. Njord was a god of ships, harbors, trade, and prosperity that came across water. That made him deeply important in a northern world where the sea could be a road, a danger, and a source of survival. Yet his story is not simply about abundance. His marriage to Skadi becomes a quiet study of incompatibility. She loves the mountains, the snowfields, and the cry of wolves. He longs for the shore, the gulls, and the sound of waves beside the boat landings. They try to live in each other's place, but neither can truly rest there. This turns a divine marriage into a lesson about belonging. Some people might call it an ancient myth about geography shaping the soul. You can have wealth and honor, but still suffer when you are separated from the place that formed you. The story asks a simple question. What good is success if your heart cannot breathe there? Freyja gave away his sword and weakened himself for love. Freyja is one of the great powers of fertility, kingship, and flourishing life. He is connected with peace, harvest, desire, and the prosperity of the world. Yet one of his defining choices is a sacrifice. He falls in love with Gerd and sends his servant to win her. In that process, he gives away a sword of extraordinary power. It is not an ordinary blade. It can fight by itself, which makes its loss far more serious. Later, when the final crisis comes, that missing weapon matters. The story is fascinating because it refuses to make love simple. Desire opens the door to union, but it can also remove protection. Some people see this as a hidden warning about sacred exchange. To gain one thing, even something beautiful, a person may surrender something they will need later. The lesson is not to avoid love. It is to understand that every deep attachment changes the shape of your fate. Freyja chose half the slain before Odin received the rest. Many people think first of Valhalla when they imagine fallen warriors, but the old tradition is more surprising. Freyja receives her own share of the dead in Folkvander. This changes the picture completely. A goddess associated with beauty, desire, magic, and wealth is also a figure of death and selection. She is not merely decorative. She chooses who comes to her. That detail gives her a depth that modern retellings sometimes miss. Freyja stands at a crossroads where love and mortality are not opposites. They belong to the same sacred power. Some people see this as evidence that feminine divinity in the North was far more commanding than many simplified versions suggest. She is not waiting at the edge of the story. She holds authority over destiny. The teaching is sharp. Life is not divided into neat boxes. The forces that draw us into passion may also stand close to the mystery of death. Seda magic revealed hidden paths, but often demanded social courage. Seda was a form of magic connected with prophecy, influence, trance, and contact with unseen forces. It was strongly associated with Freyja and with women who carried special ritual authority. Yet Odin also learned it, which makes the tradition far more intriguing. The king of the gods was willing to cross a boundary that could bring criticism. That detail matters. It suggests that the search for knowledge may require a person to step outside the identity others expect them to perform. Some people read Seda as a northern form of altered consciousness. They imagined song, ritual, breath, and focused attention, opening a doorway into patterns ordinary sight cannot reach. Whether taken literally or symbolically, the lesson is powerful. Hidden paths are rarely found by people who only protect their image. The seeker must sometimes risk shame, confusion, or misunderstanding. Wisdom can wait behind the door society told you not to open. Odin learned magic from Freyja rather than mastering wisdom alone. Odin may be the great seeker of knowledge, but he is not presented as someone who invents every form of wisdom by himself. He learns an important magical art from Freyja. That detail is easy to pass over, but it changes the whole feeling of the myth. The highest god must receive instruction. He must recognize that another power holds something he lacks. This makes wisdom relational rather than solitary. It is not only stolen, conquered, or endured. Sometimes it is taught. Some people find this especially interesting because it may preserve traces of older spiritual authority that belonged to goddess figures and female ritual specialists. The myth does not need us to prove that for the point to remain strong. Real mastery requires humility. A person who cannot learn from another will eventually become trapped inside his own limits. Odin's greatness is not only that he seeks, it is that he is willing to be taught. The runes were discovered through suffering rather than casual study. In the Norse imagination, runes were never just letters on a surface. They carried secrecy, force, and sacred meaning. They could be carved, spoken, remembered, and used with great seriousness. Odin does not obtain them through comfort. He does not find them through idle curiosity. Their discovery comes through ordeal. That tells us something important about how the old stories viewed deep knowledge. It was not information waiting politely to be collected. It was a hidden structure that had to be earned. Some people drawn to mysterious traditions still feel this about runes. Each mark seems less like a symbol and more like a compressed pattern of power. The myth warns against treating such things as decoration. When a culture says its sacred signs came through suffering, it is telling us to slow down. The deeper lesson is this: the most serious knowledge does not merely add to the mind, it changes the person who receives it. Odin hung on the world tree to win sacred knowledge. The ordeal of Odin is one of the most intense scenes in Norse mythology. He wounds himself and hangs for 9 nights on the great tree. No feast sustains him. No friend cuts him down. He remains suspended between life and death until the runes reveal themselves. This is not a normal lesson from a teacher. It is an initiation. The god becomes both the seeker and the sacrifice. That makes the scene feel ancient, dangerous, and strangely psychological. Some people compare it to shamanic patterns in which a seeker is broken down and returns with hidden knowledge. The image is severe, but its teaching is clear. Some forms of understanding cannot be reached while the ego remains comfortable and defended. The old self must loosen its grip. In daily life, we know a smaller version of this. A crisis can strip away illusion. What remains may be terrible, but it may also be true. Wisdom in Norse myth often arrives through pain and sacrifice. The northern stories do not treat wisdom as a pleasant decoration placed on an already comfortable life. Again and again, insight comes at a cost. A god loses an eye. A seeker endures an ordeal. A ruler learns more than he can bear. This does not mean suffering is good by itself. It means the myths understand something uncomfortable about human growth. We often learn most deeply when we can no longer keep our old illusions alive. Some people call this an initiatory pattern. The ordinary self must pass through pressure before it can carry a larger truth. Norse mythology gives that pattern a hard edge. It does not romanticize pain, but it refuses to waste it. The lesson is useful for anyone trying to live with more strength. Do not search for suffering. Yet when difficulty comes, ask what false certainty it has broken. Sometimes the wound is also where a new kind of sight begins. Mimir's severed head still advised Odin after death. Mimir is one of the strangest wisdom figures in the Norse world because his counsel does not end with bodily death. After he is killed, Odin preserves his head with herbs and charms. The head continues to speak and guide him. That is an unforgettable image. It suggests a universe where memory can outlive ruin and where wisdom may remain active after ordinary life has ended. Some people hear this story and think of ancestor veneration, preserved skulls, or the ancient belief that the dead could still advise the living. It also reveals something about Odin. He is not willing to let knowledge disappear if there is any way to keep it speaking. The scene is eerie, but it is also deeply practical. Every culture survives by preserving voices it cannot afford to lose. A teacher dies. A warning remains. A body is gone. A memory still gives direction when the next danger comes. The well of Erd held memory deeper than ordinary time. At the roots of the world tree lies a source connected with fate, memory, and what has already been shaped. This well is not just a pool in the story. It represents a deeper idea about time. The past is not dead. It continues to feed the present from underneath. The gods themselves are connected to this place, which means even divine beings must acknowledge what came before them. Some people find this idea fascinating because it feels like a mythic version of hidden information stored beneath reality. Nothing is fully lost. Everything leaves a mark in the waters below the visible world. The same is true in a human life. Old choices, family patterns, and forgotten fears can influence the branches we show to others. The myth teaches that destiny is not only found by looking forward. Sometimes the future is understood by returning to the deep source that remembers what we have ignored. 3 Norns shaped destiny at the roots of Yggdrasil. The Norns are among the most mysterious powers in the Norse imagination. They are not merely helpers of the gods. They stand near the roots of the world tree and are connected with the shaping of destiny itself. Their presence makes the cosmos feel governed by something deeper than command. Fate is not shouted from a throne. It is tended, marked, and maintained in a hidden place. That is what makes them so unsettling. Their power is quiet, but it reaches everywhere. Some people think of them as ancient pattern keepers. Others see them as mythic figures for the way past, present, and future are bound together. The important point is that the greatest beings in the stories still live inside a structure they did not create. For the listener, this carries a strong lesson. Not every power announces itself loudly. Some of the strongest forces in life are working at the roots long before anything appears above ground. Fate was woven rather than commanded by a single ruler. Norse mythology often imagines destiny less like an order and more like a fabric. That difference matters. A command is simple. A woven thing is layered. Threads cross. Tension gathers. One strand affects another. A promise made today may tighten around events years later. This way of seeing fate feels complex and strangely realistic. Life rarely moves in a straight line from cause to result. It behaves more like interconnection. Some people who enjoy alternative models of reality find this deeply compelling because it resembles the idea that everything participates in a larger pattern. The mythic language does not need modern terms to make the point. Every action enters the weave. Every oath adds weight. Every betrayal changes the design. The lesson is not that humans are powerless. It is that power is relational. We do not control the whole cloth, but we are never outside it. Even a single thread can change how the pattern holds. Warriors sought glory because reputation could outlive the body. In the old northern world, death was not an abstract idea kept at a distance. It was close, practical, and often sudden. Against that reality, reputation became a serious form of survival. A body could fall, but a name could remain in speech. A deed could be retold by descendants, poets, and strangers who never saw the person alive. That is why glory mattered. It was not only pride, it was resistance against being erased. Some people today find this harsh, but it has a clear logic. If comfort cannot be guaranteed, then the question becomes what kind of memory you will leave behind. The heroic world of Norse myth is built around that question. A brave action becomes a second life carried in language. The teaching still speaks to modern people. You may not control how long you live. You can still shape whether your actions deserve to be remembered. The poetic Edda preserves voices from a vanished northern world. This collection is one of the main doorways through which the old myths reached the modern world. It does not feel like a neat handbook written for beginners. It feels like a survival of older voices. The poems carry stories of gods, heroes, warnings, riddles, and cosmic endings. Behind them stands an oral culture where memory mattered intensely. That alone is astonishing. Words spoken long ago moved through time, changed hands, entered manuscripts, and still found their way to us. Some people like to imagine such texts as fragments from a lost broadcast. They are incomplete, but the signal remains powerful. This gives the myths an extra charge of mystery. We are not only studying stories, we are listening to what survived a massive cultural transformation. The lesson is simple and serious. Wisdom traditions can vanish if nobody carries them. A remembered poem can become a bridge between worlds that history tried to separate. Snorri Sturluson helped preserve myths that might otherwise have disappeared. Much of what modern people know about Norse mythology comes through the work of Snorri Sturluson. He lived in medieval Iceland after the old pagan religion had given way publicly to Christianity. That makes his role both precious and complicated. He preserved stories about gods who were no longer officially worshipped in the same way. Without his work, many names, relationships, and mythic episodes might be far harder to recover. Yet his distance from the older world also raises questions. What did he reshape? What did he explain through the assumptions of his own time? What was already fading when he wrote it down? Some people find this part of the story as fascinating as the myths themselves. We are looking for a window made by a later mind. The teaching is humbling. The past often reaches us through imperfect guardians. We should be grateful for what survived, while remembering that survival is not the same as completeness. Skalds carried history through disciplined memory and powerful spoken art. Before stories lived securely in books, trained poets helped carry memory through the spoken word. Skalds were not casual entertainers filling empty time. They served rulers, shaped reputations, and preserved deeds through complex verse. Their craft required discipline. A badly made poem could fail to honor a patron. A powerful poem could carry a name far beyond one lifetime. This gives Norse culture a very different feeling from a world that trusts screens and archives. Speech itself was a vessel of continuity. Some people underestimate oral cultures because they imagine memory as weak. Yet when memory is trained by rhythm, social pressure, and repeated performance, it can become remarkably strong. The Skald reminds us that language can be a kind of storage technology. It can hold pride, grief, warning, and identity. The lesson is worth keeping. A culture becomes what it repeats. What people speak with care may last after stone and metal are gone. Kennings turned simple ideas into layered puzzles for listeners. Norse poets loved a special kind of compact expression that made the listener work. Instead of saying, "sea," a poet might speak of the Whale Road. Instead of saying blood, he might use a phrase that pointed toward battle through shared cultural memory. These were not random flourishes. They were layered signals. To understand them, a listener needed knowledge of myth, history, and poetic habit. That turns language into a test of belonging. You either knew the code or you felt the door remain partly closed. Some people who enjoy hidden meanings find kennings especially exciting because they show how much information can be packed into a few words. A phrase could hold a whole story behind it. This changes how we think about ancient poetry. It was not simple because it was old. It could be dense, clever, and demanding. The teaching is clear. Language becomes powerful when it invites the listener to enter more deeply. Thor's hammer protected weddings as well as battlefields. Mjolnir is famous because it is a weapon, but that is only part of its sacred power. It was also connected with blessing and protection. In the myths, it could be used to sanctify a marriage. That detail is important because it shows that Thor's force was not only destructive. His power protected life at the points where life needed to continue. A wedding is not a battlefield, but it still requires defense. It joins households, opens a future, and creates responsibilities that must survive pressure. Some people see this as evidence that ancient symbols were much richer than modern branding allows. A hammer could mean thunder. It could mean impact. It could also mean sacred protection over a promise. The lesson is practical. Strength reaches its highest form when it guards what is vulnerable. The hand that can strike must also be able to bless. Otherwise, power becomes nothing more than noise. Mjolnir returned to Thor because divine power required loyalty. The returning hammer is one of the most memorable features of Thor's mythic identity. He can throw it out into danger, and it comes back to him. That is not just an exciting detail for storytelling. It suggests a bond between power and rightful use. Mjolnir is not a loose force wandering wherever it pleases. It belongs to a relationship. Some people who enjoy speculative ideas see enchanted weapons as evidence that ancient minds imagined objects as holding intention, spirit, or sacred charge. A tool was not necessarily dead matter. It could be bound to purpose. In that sense, the hammer becomes more than equipment. It is disciplined force. For modern life, the teaching is surprisingly useful. Strength must return to the center that gives it meaning. Talent, anger, influence, and authority all need loyalty to something higher than impulse. Power that cannot return home eventually becomes a danger to the one who holds it. Thrym stole the hammer and forced Thor into a bridal disguise. This story begins with a crisis that is almost absurd. Thor wakes to discover that his hammer is gone. Without it, the gods are exposed. The thief is Thrym, a giant who demands Freyja as his bride in exchange for returning it. The gods do not solve the problem with immediate battle. They solve it with disguise. Thor must dress as the bride and enter the giant's hall, while Loki explains away every suspicious detail. The scene is funny, but the stakes are deadly serious. The protector of the world has to endure humiliation to recover the instrument of protection. That is why the story works so well when spoken aloud. It gives the audience laughter, tension, and reversal all at once. The lesson is sharper than it first appears. Pride often blocks the path to victory. Sometimes the strong person must accept an embarrassing role until the moment comes to act. That comic theft shows how myth could teach through laughter. The stolen hammer tale proves that Norse mythology was not only grim prophecy and fatal combat. It could use comedy with real intelligence. The gods panic because the weapon that protects them has vanished. Thor is placed in an undignified role. Loki must improvise explanations as the deception nearly fails. The giant sees what he wants to see, which makes him easier to fool. This is more than entertainment. Humor exposes weakness without delivering a lecture. It shows how desire can blind the powerful. It shows how rigid pride must bend when survival is at stake. Some people who study old storytelling believe comedy helped communities handle fear. Laughing at a sacred crisis does not make it meaningless. It makes it bearable. The teaching remains useful. When life becomes tense, the mind may need more than seriousness. A well-timed laugh can reveal the shape of a problem and return courage to the room. Loki's children became forces that even the gods could not ignore. The children of Loki are not minor figures. They become central powers in the fate of the cosmos. Fenrir is the wolf whose destiny terrifies the gods. Jormungandr grows into a serpent that encircles the human world. Hel becomes the ruler of a major realm of the dead. This is an extraordinary family pattern. Loki's unpredictability does not stay private. It becomes world-shaping. The gods try to manage these beings because they sense the danger in them. But each attempt carries consequences. Some people read this as a warning about what happens when a society pushes troubling forces to the margins without understanding them. Rejected powers may not disappear. They may grow stronger in exile. The myth feels psychological as well as cosmic. The parts of life we refuse to face can return in larger forms. The teaching is not that every danger can be embraced. It is that fear without wisdom often makes danger harder to control. Fenrir was bound because fear made the gods betray their promise. Fenrir is terrifying, but the story around him is morally complicated. The gods know prophecies that place him at the center of future disaster. They decide to bind him before that day arrives. The wolf suspects deception, so he demands a pledge. Tyr places his hand in Fenrir's mouth to prove good faith. When the magical binding holds, Fenrir understands the trick and bites down. The gods prevent one danger, but they do it by breaking trust. That is why the story has such force. It does not let us feel completely clean about the side of order. Some people hear this and think of leaders who justify betrayal in the name of security. The myth does not offer an easy solution. It shows fear pushing even divine beings into a compromised act. The lesson is uncomfortable. When you betray your word to stop a monster, something monstrous may already have entered the room. Tyr lost his hand because honor sometimes pays for order. Tyr's sacrifice is one of the clearest examples of personal responsibility in Norse mythology. He knows the situation with Fenrir is dangerous. He also knows that the wolf is being deceived, yet he is the one who places his hand in the wolf's mouth. That act makes the binding possible. When the trap succeeds, he pays the visible cost. This is not a simple story of triumph. It is a story of order built through loss. Tyr becomes memorable because he accepts the consequence that others avoid. Some people believe he may once have held a much greater place among the gods, perhaps connected with law and sky. Even if that older role faded, this surviving myth gives him enormous dignity. The teaching is hard and adult. Some social peace is purchased by people willing to bear wounds that cannot be hidden. Honor is not always applause. Sometimes honor is the missing hand that proves you stood there. The binding of Fenrir reveals how mistrust can create destiny. The gods fear what Fenrir will become, and that fear shapes how they treat him. They do not build trust. They design a trap. The wolf then experiences betrayal and becomes the enemy they expected. This is one of the sharpest patterns in myth because it shows destiny forming through behavior. The future may be foretold, but the road toward it is paved by choices. Some people would call this a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more violently someone tries to prevent a feared outcome, the more they may help create it. That is why the story still feels modern. Families do this. Governments do this. Individuals do it inside their own minds. Treat a force as hopelessly dangerous, and it may learn to become exactly that. The myth does not say, trust is always safe. It says, mistrust is not neutral. It has creative power, and that power can build the very future it dreads. Jormungandr surrounded the world as a living boundary of danger. The world serpent is not just another creature in the mythology. It is a cosmic limit. Cast into the sea, it grows so vast that it surrounds the human realm and holds its own tail. That image is unforgettable because it turns danger into a boundary. The known world exists inside a ring of power that no ordinary person can control. For seafaring people, this would have felt immediate. The ocean gave food and travel, but it also hid terror beneath the surface. Some people connect the serpent's circular form with ancient symbols of cycles, containment, and returning time. Others see it as the mythic edge of human knowledge. Either way, Jormungandr tells us that safety exists inside limits. The monster does not need to attack every moment to matter. Its presence defines the world. The lesson is humbling. We live within boundaries made by forces larger than our plans, and wisdom begins by admitting they are there. Hell ruled the dead who did not die in battle. The realm of hell is often misunderstood because later ideas about the underworld can distort it. In the Norse tradition, hell is connected with those who die through illness, age, and ordinary fate, rather than through heroic combat. Its ruler is also named Hel. She is one of Loki's children, and her role is far more important than a simple villain would be. She receives the dead who do not fit the warrior ideal. That means she governs a vast and serious part of human destiny. Most lives do not end in legendary battle. Most deaths are private, quiet, and uncelebrated by heroic song. The myth makes room for that truth. Some people find Hel fascinating because she represents the reality that glory-centered cultures sometimes struggle to honor. The lesson is stern but compassionate. Human worth cannot depend only on dramatic endings. Death has many doors, and most people pass through the quieter one. The afterlife was divided by circumstance rather than simple reward. Norse ideas about what happens after death were not built around one neat destination for every soul. The picture is more varied. Some of the dead go to Odin. Some are chosen by Freyja. Many belong to Hel. Others seem linked with the sea, burial mounds, or family presence. This complexity is fascinating because it suggests that death was understood through relationship, role, and manner of passing, rather than only through moral scoring. Some people find that far more mysterious than a single afterlife system. It feels like the dead remain connected to the pattern of their lives. A warrior, a sailor, a farmer, and a household ancestor may not share the same spiritual road. The Old North did not flatten destiny into one simple answer. The teaching is useful even now. People are not identical in life, and the myths refuse to make them identical in death. The end continues the story rather than erasing its texture. Baldur's dreams warned the gods that innocence could still fall. Baldur was loved because he seemed to carry a kind of brightness that even the gods trusted. Then the dreams began. They were not small worries or passing fears. They pointed toward death, and that made the divine world tremble. This is one of the great shocks of Norse mythology, because the danger does not first arrive as an army. It arrives as a message from sleep. A dream becomes the doorway through which fate enters the hall of the gods. Some people who enjoy hidden knowledge find this fascinating because it suggests that the unseen world speaks before events become visible. The mind receives the signal before the body meets the blow. Whether we take that literally or as a deep symbol, the teaching is powerful. No life is protected simply because it is cherished. Love can surround someone and still not control destiny. The myth asks us to wake up to fragility before loss forces the lesson upon us. Frigg asked nearly everything in creation to spare her son. When Baldur's death was foretold, Frigg did not simply grieve. She acted. She went through the world and drew promises from things that might harm him. Fire, water, metals, stones, trees, sickness, animals, and many other forces were asked to leave him untouched. The story is extraordinary because it imagines a mother negotiating with creation itself. Protection becomes a network of agreements. Safety is not one war. It is 1,000 promises holding together. Yet the word nearly is the wound inside the tale. One thing was missed because it seemed too small to matter. Some people hear this as an ancient warning about systems and blind spots. A grand design can fail through a tiny overlooked piece. The lesson is not paranoia. It is humility. We cannot protect what we love by assuming small things are harmless. Sometimes the overlooked detail becomes the point where fate enters. Mistletoe became fatal because one small exception can matter. The object that brings disaster is not a sword forged for war. It is not a great beast or a storm from beyond the world. It is a small plant that seemed too young, too harmless, or too insignificant to require an oath. That is why the story lands so hard. Catastrophe does not always arrive through the obvious gate. Sometimes it slips through the one gap everyone agreed was unimportant. Some people who like strange theories about myth see this as a code about neglected variables. The universe may turn on what the powerful refuse to examine. In the story, Loki notices the exception and turns it into a weapon. That is the second lesson. A flaw may sit quietly for a long time, but a clever and resentful mind can discover it. The myth teaches careful attention. Not every small thing is dangerous, but every system is only as strong as the gap it refuses to respect. Baldur's death began the sorrow that moved the cosmos toward Ragnarok. The fall of Baldur is not just one tragedy among many. It changes the emotional weather of the entire mythic world. The gods lose someone who represented trust, beauty, and the hope that goodness might be protected. After that loss, the road toward the final crisis feels more certain. This is what makes the story so powerful. A single death becomes a cosmic turning point. Some people see in it an ancient understanding that civilizations do not collapse only through battles. They begin to collapse when faith in the center is broken. When the beloved and innocent are not safe, the world no longer feels morally steady. The gods continue, but something has shifted. The listener can feel the future darkening. The teaching is sober and practical. Not all losses are equal. Some losses change the story everyone is living inside. After them, people do not merely ask what happened. They ask what kind of world remains. Hodder's blindness shows how harm can come through manipulation. Hodder is not remembered as a villain in the simple sense. He is blind, and that matters deeply. The tragedy unfolds because Loki guides his hand and uses his limitation against him. That makes the story more disturbing than a direct murder. Harm comes through someone who does not fully see what he is doing. This gives the myth a strong psychological force. People can become instruments of damage when they trust the wrong guide. They may not carry hatred, yet their actions can still wound the world. Some people hear this and think of how misinformation works. A person can be pointed toward destruction while believing he is only taking part in something harmless. The myth understood that danger is not always located in the hand that acts. Sometimes it lives in the voice that instructs. The lesson is clear. Before we act, we must ask who is aiming us and why they want our hand involved. Hermod rode to Hel to bargain for Baldur's return. After Baldur's death, the gods do not accept the loss immediately. Hermod takes Odin's horse and rides down toward the realm of the dead. This journey is not a battle charge. It is an act of desperate negotiation. He crosses a boundary most beings cannot cross, hoping that grief might be reversed by courage and speech. That gives the story an almost night journey quality. A messenger leaves the bright halls and enters the place where ordinary power has little meaning. Some people drawn to mystical stories see this as a myth of descent. The living must sometimes travel inward or downward to face what cannot be solved in daylight. Hermod does not go for glory. He goes because love refuses silence. The teaching is moving. When something precious has been lost, the first noble act may be to try. Even if the answer is uncertain, devotion still saddles the horse and rides. One refusal kept Balder from returning to the living world. The bargain for Balder's return seems almost possible. If all things weep for him, he may come back. The whole universe appears ready to grieve him home. Then, one figure refuses. That refusal holds the gate shut. The story is devastating because the scale is so uneven. Almost everything agrees, yet almost everything is not enough. Some people find this fascinating because it shows how a single withheld response can block collective healing. One hard heart, one hidden resentment, one point of resistance can prevent restoration. The myth does not need a giant army to keep the dead in place. It needs one refusal. In human life, this feels painfully real. Families, communities, and nations may be ready to heal, but one unresolved force can keep the wound active. The lesson is precise. Grief is not only private, it can become a test of the whole world's willingness to respond. Loki's punishment shows that cunning without conscience becomes isolation. After the death of Balder, Loki is finally caught and bound. The punishment is terrible, but the deeper meaning is psychological. Loki's brilliance has carried him through many dangers. He has lied, shifted, solved problems, and escaped consequences again and again. Eventually, the same cleverness that made him useful leaves him alone. Nobody can trust him enough to keep him within the community of the gods. That is the tragedy of intelligence without moral center. It wins short games and loses the larger world. Some people see Loki as the ultimate trickster archetype, but this part of the story warns against celebrating disruption too easily. A person may be interesting, witty, and impossible to predict, yet still become spiritually homeless. The myth does not say cleverness is bad. It says cleverness must serve something beyond itself. When the mind only delights in manipulation, it may one day discover that every bridge behind it has burned. Sigyn stayed beside Loki and turned endurance into quiet devotion. Sigyn is often overlooked, but her role is one of the most haunting in the mythology. While Loki suffers in bondage, she remains with him and holds a bowl to catch the venom that falls above him. When she turns away to empty it, the pain returns. This is not a story of conquest or spectacle. It is a story of staying. Her presence complicates the moral picture because Loki has caused immense harm, yet someone still stands beside him. That does not excuse him. It reveals the strange depth of loyalty. Some people find Sigyn compelling because she represents devotion without applause. She is not changing the cosmos through battle. She is reducing suffering for one being, moment by moment. The lesson is delicate. Love can sometimes become endurance at the edge of what cannot be fixed. Not every sacred act looks powerful from the outside. Some are measured by the refusal to abandon. Ragnarok begins with moral collapse before the final battle arrives. The end of the world in Norse mythology does not begin only with monsters breaking free. It begins with the breakdown of trust. Kinship fails. Oaths weaken. Violence spreads through the human world before the cosmic conflict reaches its height. This is one of the most serious teachings in the entire tradition. the universe falls apart morally before it falls apart physically. Some people who enjoy alternative readings see this as a warning that myths about apocalypse are often about social decay first. The outer disaster reflects an inner one. When people stop honoring bonds, the world loses the invisible structure that held it together. The final battle then feels less like a random event and more like a consequence. The lesson is urgent, without being sensational. Civilizations do not only need walls, weapons, and wealth. They need trust. When trust collapses, the larger order has already begun to crack, even if the buildings still stand. Fimbulwinter brings endless cold and breaks the trust between people. Before the final battle comes a terrible winter that lasts far beyond ordinary endurance. Crops fail. Warmth disappears. People are driven into desperation. The frightening part is not only the weather. It is what the cold does to the human heart. Under pressure, bonds that once seemed firm begin to fail. The myth understands that scarcity can reveal hidden weakness inside a society. Some people hear this and think of ancient memories of climate hardship, when survival depended on cooperation and the failure of one season could threaten everything. Others treat it as spiritual symbolism. When compassion freezes, community becomes impossible. The old story does not separate environment from morality. It shows them pressing on each other. The lesson is clear. Hard times test more than the body. They test whether people still recognize one another as worthy of care. A winter outside can become a winter inside if fear is allowed to rule. The wolf's call chases the sun across the sky. In the northern imagination, the movement of the sun was not merely a mechanical routine. It was a pursuit. Sheol chases the sun, and that daily chase turns time into tension. Light moves because danger is behind it. This gives the sky a dramatic life. Every day becomes an escape that succeeds until the day it does not. Some people who enjoy speculative myth notice how many ancient cultures imagined celestial events as living drama. Eclipses, disappearing light, and seasonal darkness were not dead facts. They were signs in a meaningful universe. The wolf chasing the sun also gives us a strong inner lesson. The bright part of life is always being pursued by forces that want to swallow it. Attention, gratitude, courage, and discipline keep the light moving. The myth does not say darkness is imaginary. It says the race is real. For now, the sun still runs, and that itself is a wonder. Hati pursues the moon and turns time into a hunt. The moon in Norse myth is also chased. Hati follows it across the sky, making the night feel active and alive with danger. This image changes how we hear the passing of time. It is not a clock ticking in empty space. It is a hunt. Something is always gaining. Something is always being carried forward. Some people find this fascinating because it suggests an ancient way of making astronomy emotionally meaningful. The sky becomes a story that repeats above every sleeping village. The moon's changing face, its disappearance, and its return all become part of a larger pattern of pursuit. The lesson is not fear alone. It is awareness. Time is not passive. It is moving with teeth behind it. We feel this in our own lives when deadlines, aging, and unfinished choices follow us through the dark. The myth asks us not to waste the night. Even the moon is not standing still. The sun's daughter survives and carries light into the new world. One of the most surprising details after the final destruction is that light continues through inheritance. The sun herself may be overtaken, yet her daughter follows her path in the renewed world. This gives Ragnarok a strange and powerful tenderness. The old light falls, but it has not failed completely. It has passed something onward. Some people see this as one of the great hidden teachings in the myth. Survival is not always the survival of the same form. It may be the survival of a lineage, a pattern, or a sacred duty. The image also speaks to human life. Parents die. Teachers vanish. Civilizations change. Yet a task can move into new hands. That is renewal without denial. The myth does not pretend the loss was small. It says the light still has a future. The lesson is steady and hopeful. What you carry faithfully may outlive you through someone you may never fully see. Vidar avenges Odin with silence and overwhelming force. Vidar is not the loudest god, which makes his moment at Ragnarok even more striking. He is often associated with silence and endurance. When Odin falls to the wolf, Vidar steps forward and avenges him. The power of this scene comes from restraint. He has not spent the myths boasting. He has not been at the center of every feast. Yet when the decisive moment arrives, he acts with terrifying effectiveness. Some people are drawn to Vidar because he represents hidden strength. Not every force announces itself early. Some powers gather quietly until the hour requires them. His famous shoe, built for the final act in some accounts, adds an eerie sense of preparation across time. The lesson is strong for self-mastery. Do not confuse silence with weakness. A person may be forming the capacity to act, while others chase attention. When the true test comes, stored strength can speak louder than noise. Vali grows quickly because some duties cannot wait for age. Vali is born for vengeance, and his growth is unnaturally fast. In a very short time, he becomes capable of fulfilling a grim duty connected with Baldur's death. This is not a normal childhood story. It is myth showing urgency in human form. Some tasks arrive before life feels ready for them. The world does not always wait until we are mature, confident, or fully prepared. That makes Vali's role disturbing and fascinating. He is not simply a character. He is necessity accelerated. Some people see in him a symbolic figure for the way crisis can force sudden adulthood. A person can become older in one day because the situation demands it. The myth does not soften that truth. It places it in divine family tragedy. The lesson is sober. There are duties that do not ask whether we feel ready. They arrive, and by answering them, we become someone we were not the day before. Thor defeats the world serpent, but walks only 9 steps afterward. The final encounter between Thor and Jormungandr is one of the great mutual destructions in myth. The thunder god kills the serpent, but he does not leave the battle untouched. Poison overcomes him after only 9 steps. This ending gives Thor a tragic grandeur. He fulfills his role as protector, yet victory does not save him. That is what makes the moment unforgettable. It rejects the easy fantasy that defeating the monster means returning home unchanged. Some people see this as a mythic recognition that toxic forces can wound even when overcome. A danger may be conquered outwardly while its venom continues inwardly. The lesson is powerful for ordinary life. Some battles must be fought even when they cost more than anyone wishes. Success may not look like survival. It may look like completing the task before the body gives way. Thor's final steps are few, but they carry the weight of a whole world defended. Surtur carries fire that ends the old world's order. Surtur stands at the edge of the final destruction with a fire that transforms everything. He is not merely a warrior with a burning weapon. He is the force through which an age comes to its end. In the mythic imagination, fire is not only damage. It is clearing, consuming, and making space for what follows. This makes Surtur frightening, but not meaningless. Some people who enjoy speculative readings connect him with ancient memories of volcanic fire, solar terror, or the overwhelming power of natural catastrophe. The myth does not need one fixed explanation to remain compelling. It gives a face to the force that no order can permanently resist. Halls, boundaries, and proud structures all meet the flame. The teaching is stark. Every system believes it can last. Yet there are powers that arrive not to negotiate, but to end the old arrangement. When that happens, survival belongs to what can be renewed after burning. Lif and Lifrasir survive by hiding in a sacred wood. After the Great Destruction, human life continues through two survivors. Their names are often understood in connection with life and the will to live. They endure by sheltering in the protected wood, and from them, humanity begins again. This detail changes the whole emotional meaning of Ragnarok. The final catastrophe is enormous, but it is not total. Somewhere away from the central violence, life is being preserved. Some people find this deeply intriguing because it suggests that renewal may come from what was hidden rather than what was powerful. The grand halls fall. The famous gods die. Yet two human beings in shelter carry the future. That is a profound reversal. The myth honors quiet survival as much as heroic combat. The lesson is practical and comforting. When great systems break, the seed of tomorrow may be small, unnoticed, and protected by withdrawal. Not every act of courage looks like charging forward. Sometimes it looks like staying alive. The renewed world rises because endings never hold absolute authority. The Norse vision of catastrophe is severe, but it does not end in empty darkness. A new world appears after the old one is broken. Fields return. Some divine figures survive or come back. Human life begins again through those who endured. This is not easy optimism. The losses are real. The grief is enormous. Yet the myth refuses to give destruction the last word. That is one reason it remains so powerful. It allows us to face endings without worshipping them. Some people read this as an ancient cycle myth, where worlds pass through death and renewal again and again. Others hear it as a psychological truth. A life can be shattered and still grow a second landscape. The teaching is strong. Endings are mighty, but they are not always final authorities. Something beyond our current world may still be forming. The wise person grieves what falls, then watches carefully for what begins. Idun's apples kept the gods young and dependent on renewal. The gods of Norse mythology were not naturally beyond decline in every way. Their youth depended on Idun and her apples. That detail is easy to miss, but it is astonishing. Divine vitality required ongoing nourishment. The gods had to receive renewal from a specific source, and without it, their strength faded. This makes Idun far more important than a simple keeper of fruit. She guards the continuity of divine life. Some people find this fascinating because it suggests that even higher beings rely on a cycle of replenishment. Power is not self-sustaining. It must be fed by something fresh. The myth also gives a practical lesson for human life. No one stays strong by yesterday's strength alone. Bodies need care. Minds need rest. Communities need renewal. When the source of vitality is neglected or taken away, decline can come quickly. The old story makes youth not a possession, but a relationship with what restores us. Loki's kidnapping of Idun showed how quickly strength can fade. When Idun is taken from Asgard, the gods begin to age. Their decline is not symbolic only. It becomes visible and urgent. This is one of the clearest stories about dependency in the entire mythology. The gods may have weapons, halls, and status, but without the keeper of renewal, they weaken. Loki's role makes the episode even more interesting. His deception creates the crisis, and his cleverness must help repair it. Some people see this as a warning about how fragile elite power really is. Remove one hidden source of vitality, and the whole structure starts to fail. It is not always the loudest figure who sustains a world. Sometimes it is the quiet keeper of what everyone else consumes. The lesson is immediate. Protect the sources that restore life. A household, a body, a culture, or a soul can look strong until nourishment disappears. Then the truth appears faster than anyone expected. Bragi represented poetry as memory rather than decoration. Bragi is connected with poetry, speech, and the craft of words. In a modern world, poetry can be treated as an ornament. In the Old Norse world, it could carry reputation, history, and sacred knowledge. That makes Bragi's role much more serious. He stands for the power of language to preserve what would otherwise vanish. A well-formed verse could hold a person's name after death. It could keep a myth alive through centuries of retelling. Some people interested in hidden traditions understand why this matters. Before printing and recording, memory needed shape. Poetry gave memory a body that could move from mouth to mouth. The lesson is not only about art. It is about survival. What cannot be remembered cannot guide the future. What cannot be spoken with force may be lost. Bragi reminds us that words are not just sounds. They are vessels for carrying meaning across the dark water of time. Forseti's Hall offered justice through patient listening and settlement. Forseti is not usually the first god people mention, but his rule is deeply valuable. He is associated with judgment, reconciliation, and the settling of disputes. His hall is imagined as a place where conflicts can be resolved. This gives Norse mythology an important counterweight to battle stories. A culture that honored courage also knew the need for law, listening, and agreement. Not every problem can be solved with a hammer. Some must be brought into speech until the right settlement appears. Some people see Forseti as evidence that the northern world had a strong sense of social order beneath the dramatic myths. Feud could tear communities apart, so a sacred model of resolution mattered. The lesson is practical. Justice is not only punishment. It is the restoration of a workable balance. A wise community needs places where anger can be heard without being allowed to rule. Patient settlement can save more lives than victory. Skadi chose a husband by looking only at divine feet. Skadi enters the myths with force, grief, and demand. After her father is killed, she comes to the gods seeking compensation. One part of the settlement allows her to choose a husband from among them, but only by seeing their feet. She hopes to choose Balder because of his beauty. Instead, she chooses Njord. The scene is strange, almost comic, but it carries a sharp lesson. Partial information can shape an entire life. One visible clue may lead to a decision that does not match the deeper reality. Some people hear this as a myth about hidden knowledge and the danger of appearances. The gods create a rule, and the rule produces an unexpected bond. The result is not simple happiness. Skadi and Njord belong to different worlds. The teaching is clear. When we choose based on fragments, we may receive exactly what the fragment promised and still miss what the whole truth would have shown. Her mountain heart never fully settled beside Njord's sea. The marriage of Skadi and Njord becomes one of the most memorable stories about place and belonging. They try to divide their time between his shore and her mountains, yet each suffers in the other's home. Njord cannot bear the sounds and conditions of the high places. Skadi cannot rest by the sea with its birds and movement. This is not a failure of wealth or status. It is a mismatch of inner climate. Some people find this myth surprisingly modern because it understands that love does not erase the need for belonging. You can admire someone and still not be able to live inside their world. You can make an agreement and still feel your soul pulled elsewhere. The lesson is compassionate. Not every separation is caused by hatred. Sometimes two beings are honest enough to know they were formed by different landscapes. A good life requires more than attachment. It requires a place where the heart can settle. Ulla's name survives in places long after his stories faded. Ulla is one of the most intriguing figures because his surviving mythology is thin, yet his name appears strongly in place names. That creates a mystery. A god may have been important in ways the surviving stories no longer fully reveal. The map remembers what the manuscripts forgot. This is exactly the kind of detail that makes Norse mythology feel like a half-buried world. We have fragments, clues, and traces of worship that point towards something larger. Some people who love alternative history are drawn to figures like Ulla because absence itself becomes evidence of loss. What stories were once told about him? What rites took place in his name? Why did communities preserve him in the landscape even when later narratives gave him little space? The lesson is about humility before the past. What survives in books is not the whole truth. Sometimes the ground keeps a memory longer than the page. The god of skiing reminds us that daily skill can become sacred. Ulla is associated with skiing, archery, winter movement, and practical mastery. That makes him different from gods whose power is mainly cosmic or royal. His sacredness is tied to skill in a demanding environment. In the north, movement over snow was not a hobby. It could mean hunting, travel, survival, and military advantage. A god linked with such abilities shows how daily competence can become spiritually meaningful. Some people find this fascinating because it breaks the divide between sacred and practical. The divine is not only found in temples, visions, or grand battles. It can appear in balance, aim, timing, and bodily knowledge shaped by harsh conditions. The lesson is useful for self-improvement. Mastery is a form of respect for reality. When a person learns how to move well through the world they actually inhabit, skill becomes more than technique. It becomes an agreement with the land, the body, and the moment. Sif's golden hair began as mischief and ended as craft. The story begins with Loki cutting off Sif's hair, an act that causes outrage and humiliation. Thor demands repair, and Loki turns to the dwarves. What follows is one of the great chains of craftsmanship in the myths. The replacement hair is made of gold and becomes living beauty. The damage does not merely get covered. It leads to the creation of wonders. This is fascinating because the myth shows mischief becoming the trigger for transformation. Loki causes harm, but the response draws hidden skill out of the deep places of the world. Some people read this as an old teaching about alchemy in story form. Loss, pressure, and demand awaken craft. The lesson is not that harm is good. It is that repair can sometimes produce something astonishing. A broken situation may force a journey toward makers, tools, and talents that would otherwise have remained unseen beneath the surface. The dwarves made wonders because mastery often works in hidden places. In Norse mythology, some of the greatest treasures are not made in shining halls. They are made by dwarves in deep and hidden spaces. These craftsmen create weapons, ships, hair of gold, rings, and other objects that shape divine history. That is a powerful idea. The visible world depends on work done out of sight. Kings and gods may carry the treasures, but the makers below are the ones who understand the secret of form. Some people who enjoy speculative traditions see the dwarves as guardians of earth knowledge, metallurgy, and ancient technology turned into myth. Their workshops feel like places where matter reveals its hidden possibilities. The lesson is practical and profound. Mastery rarely begins in public applause. It is forged in concentration, repetition, and conditions most people never see. The world admires the finished wonder, but wisdom remembers the unseen hands that made it possible. Brokkr and Sindri proved that patience can outshine arrogance. The contest between the dwarf brothers and Loki is one of the great stories about craft under pressure. Loki wagers his own head because he believes his cleverness can outrun consequence again. Brokkr works the bellows, while Sindri forges treasures that will astonish the gods. Then, Loki tries to sabotage the work by stinging Brokkr in disguise. The dwarf keeps going. He endures pain, distraction, and pressure because the craft depends on rhythm. If he stops, the wonder may fail. That is what makes the story so satisfying. Loki has brilliance, but the brothers have discipline. The myth honors the kind of excellence that does not need applause while it is being made. Some people see in this tale a hidden respect for ancient metalworkers, whose knowledge must have seemed almost magical. The teaching is clear. Talent may impress a room, but patience builds the thing that survives after the performance is over. Draupnir multiplied itself and turned wealth into a sacred rhythm. Draupnir was not just a golden ring. It had the strange power to produce more rings from itself at regular intervals. That makes it one of the most mysterious objects in Norse mythology, because wealth becomes cyclical rather than static. It is not a treasure that merely sits in a chest. It generates, it repeats, it follows a pattern. Some people who enjoy symbolic readings see Draupnir as an ancient image of abundance governed by hidden timing. Others see a memory of oath rings, royal gift-giving, or the way power flowed through generosity in northern society. A ruler did not keep honor by hoarding. He kept it by giving. The ring's multiplication makes that system sacred. The lesson is useful and exact. Wealth is most powerful when it moves through a trusted pattern. A gift can create loyalty. A rhythm of giving can bind a community more strongly than fear. Gungnir never missed because divine intention needed perfect aim. Odin's spear is one of the great weapons of the gods, but its deeper meaning goes beyond combat. It is associated with certainty, authority, and the power of a will that reaches its mark. In myth, a thrown spear can also dedicate a battle, making the weapon an instrument of decision as much as violence. That is what makes Gungnir so fascinating. It is not simply sharp. It is aligned. Some people drawn to alternative ideas might see it as a symbol of focused consciousness, where intention travels through reality with terrifying precision. The weapon suggests that a sacred act is not scattered. It knows where it is going. In ordinary life, the lesson is clear. Power without aim wastes itself. A mind without direction becomes restless. The spear teaches concentration. Before we ask for greater strength, we should ask where that strength is pointed and whether the target deserves the force we send. Skidbladnir, folded like cloth, yet carried all the gods. This ship is one of the strangest treasures in the myths because it breaks ordinary logic. It is large enough to carry the gods and their equipment, yet it can be folded and placed away like a small object. It always receives a favorable wind when needed. That detail makes it feel like more than a ship. It is a dream of perfect technology, made long before modern engineering. Some people who enjoy wild theories are drawn to objects like this because they sound almost impossible, as if ancient stories preserved memories of devices beyond normal craftsmanship. Whether literal, symbolic, or purely mythic, the idea is brilliant. The best tool is not merely powerful. It is adaptable, portable, and responsive to need. The teaching is practical. True mastery creates forms that can expand when the moment requires it and disappear when they are no longer needed. Great usefulness does not always need great bulk. The ship Naglfar was built from the nails of the dead. Naglfar is one of the eeriest objects in Norse mythology. It is a ship connected with the final crisis, and it is said to be made from the nails of dead people. That is a detail nobody forgets once they hear it. It turns neglect into a cosmic material. The old warning that nails should be trimmed before burial gives the story an almost ritual seriousness. Small acts of care might delay the forces of destruction. Some people find this fascinating because it suggests a world where the treatment of the dead affected the fate of the living. The boundary between funeral custom and cosmic order becomes thin. The lesson is unsettling but precise. What we neglect can gather. Little things left unattended may become part of something much larger than anyone intended. Respect for the dead is not only sentiment. In this mythic imagination, it is part of holding disaster back. Sleipnir had 8 legs and crossed boundaries no ordinary horse could cross. Odin's horse is not simply fast. Sleipnir belongs to the class of beings that make movement between worlds possible. With 8 legs and a strange origin connected to Loki, this animal carries a sense of otherworldly function. He can travel where ordinary creatures cannot. That makes him one of the most fascinating symbols in the mythology. In a world made of separate realms, the ability to cross boundaries is rare and powerful. Some people see Sleipnir as a shamanic image, a spirit mount that carries the seeker through hidden regions of reality. Others hear echoes of elite horse culture and sacred travel. Either way, the teaching is rich. Not every journey can be made by ordinary means. Some thresholds require a different kind of vehicle. In personal life, that vehicle may be discipline, ritual, altered attention, or courage. The road between worlds opens only when the traveler is carried by something strong enough. Odin rode through worlds because knowledge rarely stays in one place. Odin is always moving. He does not sit forever in a hall waiting for truth to arrive politely. He travels in disguise, questions strangers, visits the dead, seeks wells, and crosses realms. That movement is part of his wisdom. Knowledge is scattered. It hides in hostile places, forgotten voices, old wounds, and uncomfortable meetings. Some people who love alternative history understand this instinct. The official story is rarely the only story. A seeker must move beyond approved rooms if he wants the strange pieces. Odin's wandering tells us that wisdom is not owned by one culture, one class, or one comfortable point of view. It must be collected at risk. The lesson is both ancient and practical. Do not expect the deepest truth to live only where you already feel safe. A larger mind is built by travel, questioning, and the willingness to enter places where your old certainty cannot follow. Hugin and Munin brought Odin thought and memory each morning. The 2 ravens of Odin fly across the world and return with what they have gathered. Their names are often understood as thought and memory. That makes them far more than impressive birds. They represent the 2 powers a seeker needs in order to understand anything. Thought searches, compares, and questions. Memory preserves, connects, and warns. Each morning, Odin receives the world again through them. Some people see this as a mythic image of intelligence gathering, almost like an ancient surveillance system carried on black wings. Others hear a psychological teaching. A person who loses thought becomes passive. A person who loses memory becomes rootless. Odin needs both, and he fears losing them. The lesson is direct. To live wisely, we must send the mind out and bring it back with care. Experience alone is not enough. We must remember what it meant, or the same world will have to teach us again. Odin feared losing memory because wisdom depends on what remains. One of the most human details about Odin is his anxiety over Munin. He worries that memory might not return. That fear is profound because it reveals the weakness inside wisdom. A mind can seek, travel, and gather knowledge, but if memory fails, the meaning cannot be held. This makes Odin less like an untouchable ruler and more like every person who knows that forgetting is a kind of death. Some people find this detail fascinating because it suggests that ancient myth understood consciousness with surprising depth. The self is not only what it thinks now, it is what it can still remember. Without memory, identity loosens. Lessons fade. Oaths lose their weight. The teaching is simple and serious. Protect what must not be forgotten. Write it, speak it, repeat it, honor it. Wisdom is not the amount of information that passes through us. It is the truth that remains when the moment is gone. The mead of poetry turned inspiration into a treasure worth stealing. The story of the mead of poetry treats creative speech as something powerful enough to be guarded, desired, and stolen. This is not a casual drink for entertainment. Whoever drinks it gains the gift of inspired expression. That makes poetry a kind of sacred technology. Words can alter reputation, preserve memory, persuade rulers, and carry hidden knowledge into the future. No wonder such a gift becomes the center of deception and pursuit. Some people who enjoy mystical interpretations see the mead as a symbol of altered consciousness. It is the drink that changes the tongue and opens the mind. Others see it as a myth about the rare nature of true creative power. Not everyone who wants inspiration can command it. The lesson is vivid. Speech is not harmless when it is charged with vision. A well-shaped phrase can outlive a weapon. The old myths knew that language could become a treasure more dangerous than gold. Kvasir's blood became wisdom because knowledge can survive violence. Kvasir was formed from the peace between divine groups, and he became a being of extraordinary wisdom. Then he was killed, and his blood was mixed into the mead that granted poetic inspiration. The story is disturbing because a murder becomes the source of a sacred gift. Yet that is exactly why it is so gripping. It suggests that wisdom can pass through catastrophe and take another form. Some people might see this as an encoded teaching about cultural memory. A living teacher dies, but the essence of what he carried is preserved, transformed, and distributed. The myth does not make the violence acceptable. It shows that knowledge has a strange resilience. It can be wounded without being erased. The lesson is powerful for any age. People may destroy the bearer of truth, but truth can leak into songs, symbols, and stories. What was meant to silence wisdom may become the vessel through which it spreads. Gunnlod guarded the mead and complicates every easy tale of triumph. Gunnlod is often remembered because Odin obtains the mead of poetry from her. Yet the story is not simply a clean victory for a clever god. She guards a treasure of inspiration deep within the mountain, and Odin uses disguise, desire, and strategy to reach it. That makes the episode morally complicated. Was it conquest, seduction, theft, initiation, or all of these at once? The myth refuses to become simple. Some people are drawn to Gunnlod because she stands at the doorway of sacred speech. She is not a passive obstacle. She is the keeper of something the highest god wants. Her presence reminds us that powerful gifts often pass through relationships marked by trust and ambiguity. The teaching is important. We should be careful with stories that celebrate the winner too quickly. A treasure gained may still carry the memory of the one who guarded it, and the cost of how it was taken. The best myths refuse simple heroes and simple villains. Norse mythology remains fascinating because its characters rarely fit neatly into modern categories. Odin is wise, but he can be ruthless. Thor is protective, but he can be quick-tempered. Loki is dangerous, but he also solves impossible problems. Giants oppose the gods, yet they carry old knowledge. This complexity makes the myths feel alive. A simpler story might be easier to summarize, but it would not hold attention for centuries. Some people enjoy these tales because they feel closer to real life than polished moral diagrams. Real beings are mixed. Motives overlap. Good outcomes can come from troubling acts, and bad outcomes can grow from understandable fear. The teaching is mature. When we demand that every figure be purely good or purely evil, we stop learning from the full pattern. Wisdom begins when we can look at contradiction without immediately flattening it into comfort. Loki's gifts and crimes make him impossible to reduce. Loki is the character everyone wants to define, and the myths keep resisting that definition. He gives the gods solutions, treasures, and chances of survival. He also brings deception, humiliation, grief, and eventually, disaster. This is why he remained so magnetic. He is not only a villain. He is not only a helper. He is the unstable intelligence that can open a locked door or burn down the house around it. Some people see him as the trickster force found across many cultures. Others treat him as a warning about brilliance without loyalty. What makes him so useful for wisdom is the discomfort he creates. He exposes the weaknesses of everyone around him, but he also exposes his own lack of center. The lesson is clear. A gift is not the same as a virtue. A clever person may improve your life today and destroy your trust tomorrow. Discernment matters more than fascination. Thor's strength matters most when it serves protection rather than pride. Thor is powerful, but the meaning of his power is not found in showing off. He matters because he guards the human world, confronts threats, and stands between order and what would crash it. That gives his strength a moral direction. Without that direction, the hammer would be only a symbol of force. With it, the hammer becomes protection. Some people today are drawn to Thor because he is simple in the best sense. He does not seek knowledge through endless schemes like Odin. He does not twist every situation like Loki. He meets danger directly. Yet the deeper teaching is not that directness alone is enough. It is that strength must know what it is defending. The same elegy that protects can also intimidate if pride takes command. Thor's greatness lies in service. A strong person becomes trustworthy only when others feel safer because that strength exists. Odin's hunger for knowledge warns against wisdom without tenderness. Odin seeks knowledge with almost frightening intensity. He sacrifices, travels, questions, deceives, and risks himself in pursuit of what is hidden. This makes him one of the most compelling figures in mythology. Yet his hunger also has a shadow. Knowledge can become cold when it is separated from compassion. A mind that wants to see everything may begin to treat others as pieces in a larger design. Some people are fascinated by Odin because he feels like the patron of forbidden research. He will pay prices that ordinary beings would refuse. But the myth also asks whether every door should be opened in the same spirit. The lesson is important for seekers of any kind. Insight is powerful, but it does not automatically make the heart wise. A person may know more and love less. The highest wisdom must include tenderness, or it may become another form of control dressed as understanding. Norse gods argue often because power does not remove confusion. The gods hold councils, disagree over plans, panic during crises, and make decisions with incomplete information. This is one of the reasons the myths feel believable. Divine status does not give them perfect clarity. They still face uncertainty. They still misjudge situations. They still depend on advice, negotiation, and risky improvisation. Some people find this more interesting than a picture of flawless heavenly beings. It suggests a universe where power does not cancel difficulty. Even those who live in shining halls must decide what to do next without full certainty. That is deeply human. It also makes the myths useful for leadership and self-reflection. Authority is not the same as wisdom. Rank does not prevent confusion. The lesson is grounding. Do not assume that powerful people always understand the forces they are handling. Sometimes the hall is full of gods, and still nobody knows the safest answer. Their flaws make the myths feel close to human life. The gods of Norse mythology are memorable because they are not smooth examples of perfection. They want, fear, boast, bargain, grieve, laugh, and make mistakes. That is why people still feel pulled toward them. A flawless figure may inspire admiration, but a flawed one can teach recognition. We see patterns we know. We see pride before consequence. We see love turning desperate. We see cleverness outrunning conscience. Some people who distrust official narratives may find these stories more honest than polished moral systems. They do not pretend that higher beings are simple. They suggest that greatness and weakness can live in the same character. The lesson is quietly liberating. You do not need to deny your flaws in order to study wisdom. You need to understand them before they take command. The myths do not lower the sacred by giving it flaws. They bring the sacred close enough for human beings to learn from it. Sacred trees mattered because life was imagined as deeply connected. Trees held a special place in northern imagination because they made connection visible. Roots go down. Branches reach outward. The trunk holds the living structure between hidden depth and open air. That pattern made the tree a natural image for existence itself. A sacred tree can suggest ancestry, nourishment, shelter, and the unseen dependence of one life upon another. Some people see this as evidence of an older ecological consciousness. Others hear a spiritual teaching about the way every visible life depends on invisible support. The important point is that the tree is not a decorative symbol. It is a model of reality. Nothing stands alone. Every branch belongs to a larger organism. Every leaf depends on what the root can draw from the dark. The lesson is direct. If we forget connection, we injure the thing that supports us. A wise life remembers that independence is always resting on deeper relationship. The ash tree linked breath, ancestry, and the structure of existence. In the Norse story of human origins, the first humans are formed from trees. In the wider mythology, the great world tree holds the structure of realms. This gives the ash tree a special resonance. It is connected with the body, the world, and the hidden architecture of life. That is fascinating because the same kind of living form appears at multiple levels. Human beings and the cosmos are not imagined as completely separate categories. Some people drawn to esoteric ideas would call this a pattern of correspondence. The small reflects the large. The person echoes the world. You do not need to take that literally for the wisdom to work. It teaches that our lives are rooted in something older than personal ambition. We are shaped beings, not isolated minds floating above nature. The lesson is grounding. To know yourself, look at what supports your breath. You are not outside the living structure. You are part of it. Norse cosmology placed humans within a living network of realms. The Norse universe was not a flat stage with humans standing alone in the center. It was a layered network of worlds, each with its own beings, dangers, and meanings. Humans lived in Midgard, but Midgard was connected to other realms by the greater structure of existence. That makes the mythology feel vast, without losing human relevance. We are not everything, but we matter because we occupy a protected place within a larger pattern. Some people who enjoy alternative ideas find this kind of cosmology exciting because it resembles a multi-dimensional map of reality. Different levels of being exist at once, and contact between them changes the story. The teaching is humbling. Human perception is limited. We may live inside one enclosure, while other orders of life move beyond our usual senses. Whether read spiritually or psychologically, the point remains strong. Wisdom begins when the human world stops pretending it is the whole world. Every realm reflected a different challenge faced by conscious beings. The worlds of Norse mythology can be understood as more than locations. Each one carries a kind of test. The human realm asks for responsibility within limits. The divine realm asks how power should be governed. The giant realm confronts order with wildness. The realm of the dead forces every living thing to face ending. This does not reduce the mythology. It makes it more useful. The old map becomes a map of experience. Some people who love symbolic systems see the realms as states of consciousness or levels of reality that a person may encounter inwardly. A crisis can feel like entering a hostile land. A moment of insight can feel like crossing into a higher hall. The teaching is practical. Life does not present one challenge. It moves us through different territories. The wise person learns to ask where they are, what rules operate there, and what kind of courage that realm requires. Monsters often guarded thresholds rather than existing for fear alone. Many beings called monstrous in Norse mythology stand near boundaries. A wolf waits at the edge of divine security. A serpent surrounds the human world. Giants occupy the lands beyond order. These figures are frightening, but they also mark transitions. They tell the listener that certain crossings are not casual. Something powerful guards the passage from safety to danger, from ignorance to knowledge, or from life to death. Some people who enjoy mythic speculation understand this immediately. The monster may be less like a random enemy and more like a gatekeeper. It asks whether the traveler is ready. That changes how we hear the stories. Fear becomes information. The terrifying figure points toward a border that matters. The lesson is useful for inner work. When fear appears at the edge of change, it may not only be trying to stop you, it may be showing that you are approaching a threshold where the old self cannot pass unchanged. The giants preserved older forces that civilization could never erase. The giants are often opposed to the gods, but they also carry ancestry, knowledge, and primal power. They feel older than the ordered world. They are tied to mountains, cold, deep memory, and the raw scale of nature. Civilization can build walls and halls, but it cannot erase what existed before it. That is why the giants keep returning to the story. Some people see them as mythic traces of older sacred powers pushed to the margins by newer forms of worship or social order. Others read them as the wild forces inside life that no law can completely tame. The teaching is important. A society becomes foolish when it thinks naming something uncivilized makes it powerless. The old powers remain. They may sleep beyond the border, or within the body, or inside the earth itself. Wisdom does not require surrendering to them. It requires remembering that they were never truly gone. Hospitality mattered because strangers could carry danger or hidden blessing. In the northern world, receiving a stranger was never a small matter. Travel was dangerous, weather could kill, and a guest might arrive in need. Yet mythology adds another layer. A stranger might be more than he seems. He might be a god in disguise, a messenger, a threat, or the beginning of a test. This makes hospitality sacred and tense at the same time. Some people find this idea fascinating because it treats ordinary social behavior as contact with the unknown. The knock at the door could change the moral shape of the household. The lesson is still alive. How we treat the vulnerable stranger reveals what kind of order we really serve. Yet the myths are not naive. They know that guests can bring risk. Hospitality requires generosity joined with discernment. A wise home opens carefully, but it does not forget that destiny may arrive wearing a traveler's cloak. Oaths carried weight because speech shaped trust between worlds. In Norse mythology, words are not treated as empty sounds. An oath creates a bond. A promise can hold society together, and a broken promise can move events toward disaster. This is why sworn speech matters so much. In a world without constant written contracts and distant institutions, trust lived in the spoken word. Myth raises that social truth to a cosmic level. Even gods become trapped by what they have promised or stained by what they betray. Some people who enjoy hidden traditions see oaths as a form of verbal magic. To speak with intention is to alter the pattern around you. The lesson is serious. If speech becomes cheap, trust becomes weak. If trust becomes weak, every relationship needs force to replace it. A wise person guards their words because words build the bridge others must walk on. Break enough bridges, and even a strong world becomes difficult to cross. Vengeance appears often because honor societies feared forgotten wrongs. Vengeance in Norse stories can seem harsh to modern listeners, but it belonged to a world where reputation, kinship, and public memory were matters of survival. If a wrong was ignored, others might read silence as weakness. That could invite further harm. The cycle was dangerous, but the fear behind it was understandable. A society without strong central enforcement often relied on honor to keep people from crossing lines. Some people find this part of the mythology fascinating because it shows a moral system very different from our own. It is not random violence. It is a troubled attempt to balance memory, dignity, and fear. The myths do not always celebrate the results. They often show how revenge can spread suffering beyond the first wound. The lesson is mature. A forgotten wrong can rot the heart, but vengeance can chain the future to the past. True wisdom must find a way to remember without becoming consumed. Courage was not confidence because fear remained part of noble action. The heroes and gods of Norse mythology do not live in a world where success is guaranteed. They often know the odds are terrible. Some even know the final outcome cannot be avoided. Yet they act. That is why their courage is not the same as cheerful confidence. It is the decision to move with fear still present. This makes the myths powerful for anyone interested in self-mastery. The old stories do not say that bravery means feeling nothing. They say bravery means refusing to let fear become the ruler. Some people find this worldview unusually honest. It does not sell comfort. It gives dignity. A person can tremble and still keep an oath. A person can doubt and still take the necessary step. The lesson is practical. Do not wait until fear disappears before doing what matters. In many important moments, fear will walk beside you. Courage is walking anyway. These myths endure because they respect beauty, danger, and impermanence. Norse mythology lasts because it does not flatter the listener with easy promises. It shows a world filled with wonder, but it never pretends that wonder removes danger. The gods are magnificent and vulnerable. The world is ordered and unstable. Love matters, yet loss still comes. This emotional honesty gives the stories their staying power. Some people are drawn to them because they feel less sanitized than many modern narratives. They do not hide the edge of existence. They teach that life can be meaningful precisely because it is fragile. That is a difficult idea, but also a freeing one. If nothing here is permanent, then attention becomes sacred. Loyalty matters. Courage matters. The present moment carries weight because it will not stay forever. The lesson is calm and strong. Beauty does not need to be eternal to be real. A passing world can still be worth loving with the whole heart. Norse mythology teaches that even doomed beings can choose meaning. The final wisdom of these stories may be this: fate has power, but it does not erase choice. Odin cannot avoid his ending. Thor cannot fight without cost. The gods know that catastrophe is coming, yet they still prepare, love, feast, argue, protect, and seek knowledge. That is what makes the mythology so moving. It does not promise escape from every dark outcome. It offers something harder. It shows beings choosing meaning inside a world they cannot fully control. Some people find this more useful than simple optimism because it matches real life. We do not know how long anything will last. We cannot guarantee safety for everyone we love. Still, we can decide what kind of presence we bring to the time given. The old northern lesson is not despair. It is defiant clarity. Even under the shadow of the end, a life can be shaped by courage, loyalty, and wisdom. We have traveled through a world where the gods were powerful, but never beyond fate. We have seen Odin sacrifice comfort for wisdom. We have watched Thor use strength in the service of protection. We have followed Loki through acts of brilliance that often carried a hidden cost. We have crossed between realms, stood beneath Yggdrasil, and watched the old world move toward Ragnarok. These stories showed us that courage does not require certainty. They showed us that wisdom can demand sacrifice, and that even the strongest beings remain vulnerable to loss. They also revealed something quietly hopeful. An ending may be terrible, but it does not always have the final word. Now, as those ancient voices begin to fade, let the world of Norse mythology drift a little farther away. Imagine the last glow of a fire settling into red embers. Outside, snow rests across the dark ground. The great halls are still. The sea has become calm. Somewhere beyond sight, the branches of the world tree continue to hold everything in place. You do not need to remember every name or every story. Let the ideas settle in their own time. Allow your shoulders to soften. Let your breathing become slower. Notice the weight of your body resting where it is. There is nothing left to solve tonight. There is nowhere else you need to be. If you enjoyed this journey, you are always welcome to like, subscribe, or leave a thought below. And if you happen to still be awake, another story is waiting for you on the screen. For now, let the old gods return to silence. Let the final echoes fade. And let your mind grow still. Sleep well, and good night.